I watched Marcus walk across the gleaming marble floor of the Riverside Country Club ballroom, his hand resting possessively on the small of a woman's back. A woman I'd never seen before, dressed in a midnight blue Valentino that probably cost more than my monthly rent. The crystal chandelier caught his cufflinks as he laughed at something she whispered in his ear, and my champagne glass stopped halfway to my lips. I know that laugh. I know every version of it. That was his impressed by someone important laugh, the one he used to give me 7 years ago when I'd say something that made him see me differently. But I wasn't supposed to be there. That's what made it worse. I was supposed to be home in our Westchester split level, organizing the guest room for my mother's visit. Instead, I was standing in the corner of Marcus's biggest annual event, the Riverside Gala, where the city's top real estate developers, hedge fund managers, and their wives gathered to donate money to themselves and call it charity. I'd come because I wanted to surprise him. Stupid. So stupid. My name is Jennifer Walsh. Or it was. Now it's Jennifer Caldwell again, officially, though the paperwork only finalized 3 weeks ago. But before all that, before the prison sentence, before the betrayal, before I became the kind of woman people whisper about at the grocery store, I was just a regular person living a regular life with a man I thought I understood. Let me take you back to the beginning. 15 years ago, I met Marcus at Northwestern. He was in business school. I was finishing my degree in accounting, and he approached me at the library's coffee cart like he was walking onto a film set. Confident, charming, the kind of guy who made you feel like you were the only person in the room, even when the room was crowded. We got married 8 years later, right after he closed his first major development deal, a boutique hotel in Miami that made him $2.3 million in profit. I remember because he said it out loud at our rehearsal dinner, and his father stood up and applauded. My parents applauded too, though I think they were more impressed by the number than by Marcus himself. We bought the house in Westchester 5 years ago. 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, an attached 2-car garage, and a wraparound porch that overlooked a quarter-acre of manicured lawn. The HOA fees were $480 a month, but Marcus said that was nothing. The kind of money you barely noticed if you were making what we were making. Our combined household income was $580,000 that year. I was a senior accountant at Deloitte. He was developing a mixed-use complex on the Upper West Side that was supposed to make him another $8 million when it sold. Everything looked perfect. And I mean everything. The house had white subway tile in the kitchen, quartz countertops, a sub-zero fridge that made ice that looked like jewelry. The master bedroom had a California king and Italian linens. My walk-in closet was bigger than most people's bedrooms. I had a Tesla in the driveway, the white one, the Model S. Marcus had a Range Rover, midnight blue, leather interior that smelled like money and self-satisfaction. We didn't have kids yet. We were waiting, Marcus said, waiting until the time was right, until his career was more settled. But I knew the real reason. He didn't want the responsibility. He was too busy, too focused on the next deal, the next property, the next way to multiply the numbers in his investment accounts. And honestly, I didn't push it. I was happy. Or I thought I was. There's a difference. I know that now. The thing about a marriage like ours, successful, enviable, the kind people post about on Instagram, is that it can hide a lot of rot underneath. You don't notice because you're too busy maintaining the appearance, too busy going to the right restaurants, wearing the right clothes, saying the right things at the right parties, like the Riverside Gala. I'd been to maybe 4 of them before. They were boring, predictable, full of the same men in the same tuxedos, talking about the same developments and tax incentives. But I went because Marcus needed me to go. Because a man like Marcus needed a wife like me, attractive enough to be decorative, smart enough to hold a conversation about markets and mortgages, and quiet enough to know when to step back and let him be the center of attention. That's what I told myself I was anyway. The gala that year was in October. Fall in New York. The trees were turning colors that looked photoshopped, and there was that crisp air that made the city feel like a movie premiere. Marcus had been distant for a few weeks, Nothing I could point to exactly, just a feeling. He was working late more often. His phone buzzed constantly, and he'd check it with this guilty expression, like he was looking at something he wasn't supposed to see. I'd mentioned it once, casually, over dinner. "Work's crazy right now," he'd said, and I'd believed him because I wanted to. I wore a floor-length emerald gown that cost $3,200. Marcus bought it for me as an anniversary gift 2 weeks before the gala. He said I looked like a mermaid. He said it with his hand on my lower back, the same way he was touching that woman in the midnight blue dress. The woman I now know was Rebecca Sterling, a commercial real estate broker who worked for a boutique firm in Manhattan. 32 years old, blonde, the kind of woman who probably looked good in everything, even workout clothes. They'd met 6 months earlier on a site visit for one of his developments. She was engaged at the time to a man named David who owned a hedge fund. They'd broken off the engagement 3 months ago. Marcus had told me David was difficult to work with when their paths had crossed at a charity dinner. I'd laughed and said most hedge fund guys were, but I didn't know that yet. On the night of the gala, I knew nothing. I was there to surprise him, and God, did I succeed. I'd arrived early, checked in at the coat check, and was making my way through the crowd toward the VIP section where the major developers were holding court. That's when I saw them. Marcus and Rebecca, standing near the bar, close enough that their shoulders were almost touching. She was tilting her head toward him, smiling at something he'd said. He was looking at her like she'd just invented oxygen. And here's the thing that made my stomach drop. I recognized that look. It was the look he used to give me. The look that said, "You matter more than everything else in this room." The look that said, "I see you." I stood frozen behind a pillar, my champagne glass suspended in midair, and watched my husband flirt with another woman while 300 people milled around us, completely oblivious. I should have confronted him right then. That's what a strong woman does, right? But I wasn't strong that night. I was terrified, because I suddenly understood, in that crystalline moment, that something fundamental had shifted in my marriage, and I had no idea how to fix it. I turned around and walked straight out of the ballroom. Coat check, valet, car. I was home in Westchester in 45 minutes, and I sat in our pristine kitchen, in my $3,200 emerald gown, and waited for Marcus to come home and explain himself. He didn't come home until 2 a.m., and when he did, he smelled like her perfume. He didn't come home until 2 a.m., and when he did, he smelled like her perfume. I was still in the kitchen. The emerald gown was draped over one of the breakfast bar stools like a deflated balloon. I'd changed into a Northwestern hoodie and sweats, the kind of clothes I used to wear in college, before I learned that appearance mattered, before I learned that everything mattered. "Jennifer?" Marcus stopped in the doorway, his bow tie undone, hanging around his neck like a noose. "What are you doing home? I thought you were—" He caught himself. His face did this thing where the blood drained out of it, leaving him looking like a wax figure of himself. "You came. To the gala." "I came," I repeated. My voice sounded strange, flat, like someone else was speaking through my mouth. "I came to surprise you." He set his keys on the counter, very deliberately, very carefully, the kind of movement someone makes when they're trying to appear casual while their entire world is collapsing. I'd seen that movement before, in my mother when she was explaining to the bank why she was 3 months behind on the mortgage. In my brother when he confessed he'd crashed my car. "How long were you there?" Marcus asked. "Long enough." He sat down on one of the bar stools, not the one with the dress on it, and put his head in his hands. "Jennifer, I can explain." "Explain what? That you were at the bar with your hand on some woman's back? That you were looking at her like she'd invented oxygen? Or explain why you came home smelling like Chanel No. 5, which isn't mine, and whose bottle I happen to know costs $180? I knew that because I'd seen it on Rebecca Sterling's Sephora wish list when I did what any reasonable person does after seeing their husband flirt with another woman. I looked her up on Instagram. It took me 3 minutes to find her account, 3 minutes to see the photos of her in her apartment, a loft in Brooklyn with exposed brick and pendant lighting. 3 minutes to see her in the emerald dress I'd worn to the engagement party of one of Marcus's colleagues 6 months ago. Except the dress fit her differently. It made her look elegant. On me, apparently, I just looked like I was trying. "It's not what you think," Marcus said. I laughed. Actually laughed. It was the kind of laugh that scared me because I didn't recognize it. It was sharp and bitter, and came from somewhere deep in my chest that I didn't know existed. "Don't," I said. "Don't do the cliché thing. Don't sit there and tell me it's not what I think when I watched you with my own eyes. I watched you, Marcus. For 10 minutes I stood behind that pillar, and I watched you look at another woman the way you used to look at me. It was just what? A moment? A mistake? A lapse in judgment?" I was standing now, my hands shaking. "How long has it been going on?" He didn't answer. He just sat there, his elbows on his knees, his face in his hands. "How long?" I said each word separately, like I was stabbing him with them. "3 months," he said finally. His voice was muffled by his hands. 3 months. 3 months of him working late. 3 months of his phone buzzing and him checking it with that guilty expression. 3 months of me accepting his explanations because I was stupid enough to trust him. 3 months of us lying in bed together, his arm around me, while he was thinking about her. I walked to the fridge. I opened it. I stood there looking at the sub-zero shelves, the organic vegetables, the grass-fed beef, the expensive cheeses, and I felt something inside me shut down. Not break, shut down. Like a circuit breaker flipping off. "Get out," I said. "Jen, get out of my house. This is my house too." I turned around and looked at him, really looked at him. At the man I'd married, the man I'd followed to New York, the man I'd supported through his business school applications, his first failed development, his slow climb to success, the man whose baby I'd wanted to have, even though he didn't want it, the man I'd made 100 small compromises for, without even realizing I was doing it. "Not anymore," I said. "You need to leave. Tonight." He stood up. He looked like he wanted to argue, and for a second, I thought he might. I thought he might tell me that I was being unreasonable, that we needed to talk about this like adults, that I should understand that sometimes men make mistakes, but that didn't mean they didn't love their wives. Instead, he went upstairs. He packed a bag. It took him 20 minutes. I timed it. Then he came back down, and he looked at me standing in the kitchen in my Northwestern hoodie and my sweats, and something shifted in his face. "I do love you," he said. "You have to believe that." "I don't have to believe anything," I said. "You need to decide what you're going to do. Are you going to keep seeing her, or are you going to fix this?" He didn't answer. He just grabbed his bag and left. That was October 15th. I remember because I checked my phone when he closed the door. 2:47 a.m. What happened next was the kind of thing that happens to other people, the kind of thing you read about on Reddit and think, "Thank God that's not me," the kind of thing that destroys people. Marcus didn't come home. He stayed at a hotel in Manhattan for 2 weeks. The Peninsula. I know because I called the concierge and pretended to be his assistant trying to confirm his reservation. They wouldn't tell me, but I found the credit card statement anyway. $1,200 a night. He was there for 14 nights. That's $16,800 in hotel fees alone, and that didn't count his meals or the incidentals. I called him on the third day. He didn't pick up. I called again. Still nothing. I texted, "We need to talk." No response. I texted again. "Marcus, please, we can work through this." He finally responded on day 4. "I don't think we can." That's when I called my mother. My mother is a lawyer, not a divorce lawyer. She's a tax attorney, but she knows people. She drove up from Connecticut that same day, and we sat in the kitchen where Marcus had packed his bag, and she told me the things I needed to know. She told me about community property, about spousal support, about the fact that in New York, infidelity doesn't matter legally, but it matters psychologically, and psychology matters in divorce negotiations. "You need to document everything," she said, Every conversation, every email, every transaction. You need to hire a divorce attorney before he does. You need to protect yourself. So I did. I hired Jennifer Caldwell. Yes, we had the same first name, which I found bitterly amusing, and I documented everything. I pulled bank statements. I found emails. I discovered that Marcus had been booking hotel rooms under a different credit card, one I didn't know about. A credit card with a $50,000 limit that he'd opened without telling me. I found messages between him and Rebecca. I found plane tickets. I found a reservation at a restaurant in Tribeca where he'd taken her 3 weeks before the gala. I also found evidence of something else. Marcus had been moving money, not large amounts, nothing that would trigger the IRS, but a consistent pattern. $5,000 here, $8,000 there. Transfers to an account in the Cayman Islands. It took me a week to trace it, but I found it. I found it because I'm a senior accountant and I know how to read financial statements, and because I'd been the one managing our joint accounts while Marcus focused on his developments. He was hiding money. Millions of dollars. I estimated about $4.2 million based on the pattern of transactions over the past 2 years. He was taking money from his development company, funneling it through a series of LLCs, and stashing it offshore. It was fraud. It was tax evasion. It was the kind of thing that could get him indicted. I didn't tell anyone. Not my mother, not my attorney, not my therapist. And by November, I had a therapist because I was falling apart. I was sleeping 4 hours a night. I'd lost 12 pounds. I'd stopped going to work. Deloitte had put me on medical leave after I'd cried in the bathroom for an hour straight during a client meeting. I just sat with the knowledge. I sat with it like it was a bomb, and I was deciding whether to defuse it or let it explode. Then, on November 23rd, Marcus's lawyer contacted my lawyer. He wanted to discuss a settlement. He was offering me $2.1 million as a buyout, half of what he'd hidden offshore, basically. He wanted me to sign an NDA and agree not to discuss the terms of our divorce with anyone. It was an insult. It was a threat. It was him telling me that he knew I knew, and he was betting I wouldn't say anything. That's when something shifted inside me. That's when I stopped being the victim of his infidelity and started being an accomplice to his crimes. And I realized that I had a choice. I could take the $2.1 million. I could sign the NDA. I could move on with my life and pretend I didn't know what he'd done. I could be comfortable and silent. Or I could burn it all down. I called my mother at 2 a.m. on November 24th. I told her everything. About Rebecca. About the offshore accounts. About the fraud. "Jennifer," my mother said, her voice careful, "do you understand what you're about to do?" "I'm about to destroy my marriage and my husband's career," I said. "Yes, I understand." "That's not a marriage anymore," she said. "That's a war." She was right. But I didn't know how deep the war would go. I didn't know that by the time it was over, I'd be the one paying the price. I didn't know that I'd end up in a federal prison camp in Alderson, West Virginia, for 18 months. I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew was that Marcus had betrayed me, and I was going to make sure he paid for it. Even if it cost me everything. Hashtag finalne chast. Federal prosecutors don't call you on a Tuesday afternoon to chat. They call you on a Tuesday afternoon when they've already built their case and they're giving you one last chance to cooperate. Ms. Caldwell. The voice on the phone belonged to an assistant U.S. attorney named Patricia Morrison. I'd never met her, but my mother had briefed me on what to expect. "We have evidence of significant financial fraud involving your estranged husband, Marcus Walsh. We'd like to discuss your role in the matter." My role. That's the thing nobody tells you about revenge. It's not clean. It's not binary. It's not you versus them. It's you versus yourself, and sometimes you lose. I'd gone to the FBI in early December. I'd walked into the field office in Manhattan with a flash drive containing copies of everything. Bank statements, emails, wire transfer confirmations, the offshore account documentation. I'd sat across from Special Agent David Chen in a room that smelled like old coffee and fluorescent lighting, and I'd told him everything Marcus had done. I'd told him the truth. Just not all of it. Because here's what I hadn't mentioned. I'd been helping him. For the first 6 months of our marriage, while Marcus was setting up those offshore accounts and funneling money through those shell LLCs, I'd been the one managing the joint accounts. I'd been the one who noticed the transfers and did nothing. I'd been the one who, when I finally confronted him about the money he was hiding, had agreed to stay quiet in exchange for him leaving Rebecca. That was in December. We'd had a conversation in my mother's office. My mother, my divorce attorney, Jennifer Caldwell, Marcus, and his lawyer. It was supposed to be a settlement negotiation. Instead, I'd said, I know about the Cayman Islands account. I know about the $4.2 million. I know about the shell companies. Marcus had gone pale. His lawyer had stood up immediately. I think we're done here. We're done, I'd said, when you agree to the following. You end things with Rebecca, immediately. You move back home. You go to a therapist with me, and we try to make this work. Or I give everything I have to the FBI, and you go to federal prison. It was blackmail, extortion. It was illegal, and I'd done it anyway. He'd agreed. Or so I thought. What he'd actually done was spend the next 2 weeks calling Rebecca, texting Rebecca, meeting Rebecca at hotels while I was at work. I'd found out because my phone's location services picked up his movements, because I was paranoid and obsessive and turning into the kind of person I didn't recognize. So on December 20th, I'd gone to the FBI, and on December 21st, they'd gotten a warrant. And on December 22nd, they'd arrested Marcus at his office on the Upper West Side, in front of his employees, his partners, and everyone who mattered in his professional life. The charge was wire fraud. The charge was tax evasion. The charges carried a maximum sentence of 20 years. But here's the part that destroyed me. The FBI asked me to cooperate. They asked me to testify about what I knew. They asked me to wear a wire and meet with Marcus to get him to confess to the fraud on tape. And I said yes. I want immunity, I told Special Agent Chen. I want written confirmation that I won't be prosecuted for anything I knew about or participated in. He'd looked at me for a long moment. What exactly did you participate in, Ms. Caldwell? I'd told him about the blackmail, about threatening Marcus with exposure unless he ended his affair, about knowing he was committing fraud and not reporting it for 6 months, about my role in the offshore accounts. Nothing illegal, technically, but ethically murky. I'd managed the paperwork. I'd known where the money was going. I want immunity, I'd repeated. Otherwise, I don't talk. They'd given it to me. Immunity in exchange for cooperation. Immunity in exchange for helping them build a case against Marcus. The wire happened on January 8th. I'd called Marcus and asked him to meet me for dinner. I'd said I wanted to talk about the possibility of reconciliation. I'd said I'd been thinking about what he'd told me, that he loved me, that the affair was a mistake, that he wanted to make things work. All lies. All recorded. We'd met at a restaurant in Tribeca, the same restaurant where he'd taken Rebecca. I'd worn a dress he liked and a microphone taped to my ribs, hidden under my bra. Special agents were in a van outside, recording everything we said. I've been thinking, I'd told him over wine that I didn't drink, about what you said, about loving me, about the mistakes. He'd reached across the table and taken my hand. I do love you, Jennifer. I know I've made terrible choices, but I love you. I want us to work. Then I need you to tell me the truth, I'd said. I need you to tell me about the money, about the accounts, about all of it. I need to understand why you did it. And he had. He told me everything, about the frustration with taxes, about feeling like the system was rigged against successful people, about wanting to protect his assets, about the $4.2 million and where it came from, and how he'd moved it, and why. Every word was recorded. Every confession was captured. When I stood up from that table, I felt like I'd hollowed myself out. I'd turned my husband in. I destroyed him. I'd done exactly what I'd set out to do, and I felt empty. The FBI arrested him again 3 days later, this time with actual evidence. This time with his own voice admitting to federal crimes. His lawyer immediately started talking plea deals. The prosecutors wanted him to serve time. They wanted 5 years minimum. Marcus asked to see me. His lawyer requested a meeting. My attorney, the divorce one, not the federal one, advised against it. "There's nothing good that can come from this," Jennifer Caldwell had said. But I went anyway. We met in a conference room at his lawyer's office in Midtown. It was January 12th. Marcus looked like he'd aged 10 years in a month. His hair had gone gray at the temples. He had dark circles under his eyes that looked like bruises. "I know what you did," he said, the moment we were alone. "I know you wore a wire. I know you turned me in." "Yes," I said. There was no point in lying. "Why?" He looked genuinely confused, like the answer wasn't obvious, like I was the irrational one. "Because you destroyed our marriage," I said. "Because you lied to me. Because you cheated on me, and then you lied about cheating on me, and then you tried to manipulate me into staying quiet about your crimes. Because I realized that I'd spent 15 years becoming the kind of woman who would accept that, and I couldn't do it anymore. So you decided to destroy me." "I decided to tell the truth," I said. "What the truth destroyed isn't my problem." He stood up. He walked to the window and looked out at Manhattan. When he turned back to me, his eyes were wet. "I hope it was worth it," he said. "I hope whatever you're getting out of this makes up for what you've lost." What I'd lost. What had I lost? My marriage, my house. We'd have to sell it to cover legal fees. My reputation, my career. Because the day the news broke about Marcus's arrest, Deloitte had called. They'd asked me to resign. They said that my involvement in the case, even as a cooperating witness, created a liability. They said it was effective immediately. So I'd lost my job, my marriage, my house, and my husband. What I'd gained was the knowledge that I'd been complicit in his crimes, that I'd known what he was doing, and I'd done nothing for 6 months, that I'd used that knowledge to blackmail him, that I'd worn a wire and turned him in not because I was a good person seeking justice, but because I was a scorned woman seeking revenge. The trial was scheduled for May. I was going to be the prosecution's star witness. I was going to sit on the stand and testify about my husband's fraud while he sat at the defense table and watched me destroy him. But before the trial, something happened that I hadn't expected. In March, the IRS opened an investigation into me. They wanted to know about my knowledge of the offshore accounts. They wanted to know why I hadn't reported them. They wanted to know about my role in the fraudulent transfers. My immunity agreement covered cooperation with the FBI, but not the IRS. Not the tax authorities. My attorney, the tax attorney, my mother, brought in a criminal defense specialist. His name was Robert Harrison, and he looked like he'd seen everything twice and been disappointed both times. "We have a problem," he said, sitting in my mother's office on a gray afternoon in March. "The immunity agreement you signed is narrow. It covers fraud and tax evasion, but only as it relates to Marcos's conduct. It doesn't cover your conduct. And what you just described to me, knowingly managing accounts connected to illegal offshore transfers, that's a problem." "But I didn't know it was illegal," I said. "I just knew the money was being hidden." "You're an accountant," Robert said flatly. "A senior accountant at Deloitte. You know the difference between legal tax planning and illegal tax evasion. You managed the accounts. You processed the transfers. You knew where the money was going. That makes you an accomplice." My mother put her hand on my arm. I was shaking. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," Robert said. "We negotiate. We tell the IRS that you're willing to cooperate, that you're willing to testify against your husband, and we ask them to consider your cooperation in their sentencing recommendation." "Sentencing?" I felt like I was falling. "I'm being charged?" "You're about to be," Robert said. "The question is whether we can make a deal before that happens." The deal was 18 months. Federal prison camp. Alderson, West Virginia. Minimum security. I could have fought it. I could have gone to trial. But Robert was honest with me about my chances. The evidence was clear. The prosecution could prove my knowledge and my participation. A jury would see me as complicit. So I took the deal. I pled guilty to conspiracy to commit tax evasion. I agreed to cooperate fully with both the FBI and the IRS. I agreed to testify at Marcus's trial, and I agreed to serve 18 months in federal prison. Marcus got 5 years. He pled guilty to wire fraud and tax evasion. The judge gave him the maximum the prosecutors requested. He's serving his time in a federal penitentiary in Pennsylvania. He'll be released in 2030. I was released in 2024. The Riverside Gala happened on October 18th, 2024. Exactly 4 years after the night I'd watched Marcus with Rebecca. I'm not sure how I found out about it. I think my mother mentioned it. She said Marcus's company had gone under during his trial. His partners had cut him loose. But there was a new development firm that had risen from the ashes. His former CFO, and a woman named Linda Chen, had taken over his projects and rebranded. And Linda was hosting the gala. I didn't plan to go. I really didn't. I was 4 months out of prison. I was living in a studio apartment in Queens. I was working as a freelance bookkeeper, taking clients who didn't Google my name. I was trying to rebuild my life in a way that didn't involve destroyed marriages or federal crimes. But I got an invitation, handwritten, addressed to Jennifer Caldwell. No return address, but the postmark was from Manhattan. I almost threw it away. Instead, I opened it. Jennifer, it read, I thought you should know that the Riverside Gala is happening again this year. Marcus will be there. So will Rebecca. So will everyone who matters in his world. I thought you might want to see it. A friend. There was no signature. I never found out who sent it. I wore a floor-length gown that cost $340. Not emerald this time, not blue, black, sleek and simple, and the kind of dress that doesn't scream for attention. I wore my hair down. I wore minimal makeup. I looked like a woman who had nothing to prove. Which was true. The ballroom looked the same. The same crystal chandeliers, the same marble floor, the same catering stations, and the same bartenders in the same white gloves. 300 people in designer clothes, donating money to themselves and calling it charity. Marcus was standing near the bar when I walked in. He was with Rebecca. She was wearing the midnight blue Valentino. He saw me before I saw him. I watched his face go through a series of expressions, confusion, then recognition, then something that looked like fear. He stood up. He excused himself from Rebecca. He walked across the marble floor, and the crowd seemed to part for him without even knowing they were doing it. Jennifer, he said, what are you doing here? I got an invitation, I said. It wasn't a lie. Just not the whole truth. You shouldn't be here. Why not? I asked. I'm free. I served my time. I paid my debt to society. I'm no longer a felon, and I'm allowed to attend charity galas. He looked like he wanted to say something. He looked like he wanted to explain or defend or justify. Instead, he just looked tired. I heard you lost everything, I said. The company, the partners, the development deals. I heard you're going to be unemployable in Manhattan when you get out. I heard Rebecca's engaged to someone else now. Did you know that? She got engaged last month. To the man who bought your properties at foreclosure. Jennifer? I also heard that you're not eligible for early parole, I continued. That you're serving the full 5 years. That you'll be 62 when you're released. That your father stopped speaking to you. That your mother hired a therapist specifically to deal with the shame. His face crumpled. Actually crumpled, like someone had punched him in the gut. Do you know what I've realized? I said. You're not destroyed because of me. You're destroyed because of you. I just held up a mirror. I just told the truth. And the truth destroyed you because you'd built your entire life on lies. I loved you, he said. His voice broke. Jennifer, I loved you. No, I said. You loved the idea of me. You loved that I made you look good. You loved that I was smart enough to manage your money and quiet enough to not ask questions. You loved that I was there. But you didn't love me. I turned away from him. I walked back into the crowd. I didn't look back. Rebecca was watching me from across the room. She looked terrified. I smiled at her, genuinely smiled, And then I walked to the coat check, collected my jacket, and left. The valet brought my car, a 10-year-old Honda Civic. It smelled like coffee, and the air freshener I'd bought at CVS for $3.99. It was the most honest thing I owned. I drove home to Queens, to my studio apartment, to my small life. And for the first time since I'd met Marcus Walsh 15 years ago, I felt like I could breathe. He'd destroyed me. I'd destroyed him. The math balanced. The debt was paid. And I was finally free. That's what revenge costs. Everything. But sometimes, everything is the only price that feels like enough.